Hi, everybody. My name is Matthew Poes of Poes Acoustics, and we're answering questions. So this one is from Johnaz. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Super grateful for the answer already gave me, and a lot of think about and tinker with REW time. So he goes on to explain further his situation, which is that he's got 4 sealed subwoofers, 2 SVS 3000 micros, and 2 SVS SB 2000 pros. They're mid-wall, so instead of being in the corners, for instance, that people are familiar with the different Harman placements, one of the better ones that came up was placing them in the middle of each of the 4 walls. And that is, in fact, a pretty good placement. It works well. He says it works really well. He said, let's see, this arrangement already helps a lot in my initial measurements. My AVR is an Integra DRX 3.4 with full range direct live available, but no DLBC license possible. So he can't do direct live with bass control. Would need to upgrade to a DRX 8.4 or similar AVR. He recently acquired a MiniDSP Flex and have turned off all the onboard DSP he could from the SVS app for each of the sub and set the crossover to off LFE. Understands that the SVS retains some DSP that is undefeatable, but also assumes that's mostly to protect the subs. So I do want to mention that all subwoofers, for the most part, all modern, well-designed commercial subwoofers, for the most part, are going to have DSP. That's just a normal part of it. DSP is digital signal processing. It's a very generic term for all sorts of things that are happening related to affecting the signal itself. So the first one that probably is undefeatable is the just general way that it tunes the frequency response to get the desired results. So you don't want to defeat that. It's very unlikely that you on your own, even as a fairly proficient DIYer, could do what they do. You got to know, I know this because I see the data sent to me in reports all the time from these companies, that the tools they're using are so far beyond even anything I have access to or could even reasonably afford. So frequently when they're doing their frequency response tuning of the system, and then the other DSP, you can't defeat the limiters, they're using things like laser vibrometers that actually look at the way the cone is moving and actually measure frequency off the cone from the laser and have that confirmed by the microphone. So they're using multiple sources of information. They often have microphones at different locations, like a near field microphone and a far field microphone, and the data gets acquired all at the same time, and they're able to monitor how different types of distortion and nonlinearities arise at different levels. They then can tune the system and optimize it. Companies like SVS, like Bang & Olufsen, they might do it too. Bowers & Wilkins, like Paradigm, all of these companies have these kinds of tools and do extensive testing of their products. So you're right, you cannot defeat that, but you also do not want to defeat that. That is an integral part of the product. What you would use a MiniDSP Flex for, and what Direct Live is doing, actually is more related not to tuning the subwoofer's response itself, but to optimizing the system's response in room. So all you're trying to do is get as close back to what the sub did in an anechoic environment. You're not trying to change the intrinsic capabilities of the subwoofer because you can't. The intrinsic capabilities of that subwoofer are already fixed by the manufacturer as they should be, because it's based on information the manufacturer has on what it's capable of doing. There are people, now that doesn't mean you couldn't change the intrinsic capabilities, it just means you shouldn't. So you absolutely could take the Flex and add tons and tons of boosts below whatever, let's just say it starts to roll off at 30 hertz and you want more bass. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. In a well-designed subwoofer like the SVS, it will stop you through the limiters, meaning you're just going to hit the limits of what that thing is capable of much sooner, and then it's just not going to go any louder. In lesser subwoofers, what could happen is you would outright overload the thing and it would distort very badly, or in some cases you would do damage. So what you should be focusing on is not extending the bass lower. It should be on smoothing and flattening out the response and then hitting a certain target curve for the bass response across the seated positions that you have. So, all right, we've addressed that. Now you say, should I also be turning off crossovers from my AVR as well as sending full LFE, highest crossover possible from the AVR to the Flex, and then letting the, gets cut off, but I think it's like letting the, something from the AVR to the Flex and then letting the, oh, I see, and then letting the Flex actually do all the work after I've measured from REW. If I do that and then run Direct Live at the end, should I make sure that the DL filter, Direct Live filter, stops at my crossover point set up in my Flex, or let DL run full range? Okay. I would not try to do bass management in the Flex like this. So it is theoretically possible to do bass management through a MiniDSP if you really wanted to. And they even made a device at one point. I don't know if they still make it, but they made a higher channel count device that could be used basically to take over all the bass management. And it gave you a lot of flexibility. But a Flex is not one of those devices. My recommendation would not be to try to do that because it gets really tricky to do that right. What you'd actually probably have to do is, because it's only a 2 in 4 out device, is you would actually set the receiver up so that the speakers are not small but large for the left and the right only. Yeah, you'd have to set it so that the left and the right are small, are large. All the other speakers can be set to small as desired. But then you have to set the system as if it has no subwoofer. And then what's going to happen is it's going to reroute all the bass to the left and the right speakers. You would then have that go into the Flex, where you would then do your bass management there between the left and the right speakers and the subwoofers. Now, could you do that and get good results? Probably. There's a couple of things you're going to do to yourself that are going to be tricky, and this is where you get into you're going to have to know what you're doing part of it. The Flex itself is going to have latency to it. All DSP does. Now, this latency is something you're having to deal with anyway. So even when you go from the subwoofer out to the Flex and then use that for DSP, what's happening is you're adding somewhere between, let's just say, 10 milliseconds and 20 milliseconds of delay. I've heard people claim all sorts of different numbers. I've heard some really low numbers. I'll just say every system I've ever done, it didn't add those low numbers. It added much, much higher numbers to it. So we're going to argue it's really closer to 10 to 20 milliseconds, which is about 10 to 20 feet. So if you add 10 to 20 feet, what you have to do is tell the system that the subwoofer is that much farther away. Now, assuming that's possible, say the real distance between you and the subwoofer is 12 feet. And let's just say that the subwoofer has another 10 milliseconds of delay of its own. So it's showing up as being, instead of being 12 feet, it shows up as 22 feet if you were to run the automatic system. Now let's just say that you've added an additional 10, we'll go low. We'll say just 10 milliseconds of delay. Now you're at 32 milliseconds, or 32 feet, sorry. So then you're going to have to go in and enter into the Ankia or into the Integra 32 feet. Now, if it's 20, you'd have to add 42 feet. And if you were to do it this way with the left and the right speakers instead, you'd have to enter that into the left and the right speaker distance instead. What can sometimes happen is it can sometimes screw up lip sync, and because the system doesn't actually have the ability to handle that much delay. One of the things that started to happen recently, it used to be in the old days that video processing in general was very, very slow. And as a result of that, there was plenty of headroom to slow down the audio in order to get it to sync properly with the video. Lately, video processing has gotten so fast that that's not true anymore. And we've started to run into problems where after a lot of processing gets put on the audio, we actually have slowed it so much that we can't possibly get a good lip sync. For those who aren't aware, the way lip sync works on receivers is actually by slowing the audio down. It cannot slow the video down. That would require a video processor that has that ability, and no receiver that I'm aware of has that capability. None of the processors that I tune with on a routine basis, like the Trinnovs and the Storms, have that capability. Excuse me. So instead, what actually has to happen is we have to throw in like a MAD VR, which in and of itself slows the video down, and then do things to that to try to further slow the video down to compensate. So that's the problem you run into when you start to add a Flex in, is that you have to make sure you can compensate for the delay. The other thing to keep in mind is that the more filters you apply to something, it depends. Different filters have different latencies, and some actually would not add significant or any latency. But if you start adding in things like low-pass filters, high-pass filters, PEQ, especially with a lot of boost, shelf filters, each of those will inherently add group delay and latency. It'll increase the latency somewhat. So you've got to be really careful how that affects things. And so here's my suggestion. I know it's gotten really, really popular to push the Flex or any of the other MiniDSPs as a superior way to get good bass. And it is a way of getting really good tuning, but you have to understand the full picture and account for it properly. So when you're taking measurements, you have to look at the phase alignment, the time alignment, which is actually really critical and ignored often, as well as the amplitude response. I would actually leave the bass management in the receiver for most people because I think it'll be easier for you to handle everything else that needs to get done. as I said, you could try making the left and the right speakers large, telling the receiver it doesn't have any subwoofer, and then letting it reroute all the bass to the left and the right, and then using the flex to handle bass management between the left and the right and the subwoofers. My only concern with that would be whether it would be still possible to ensure a good alignment between the subwoofer and the center channel and the surround speakers and the tops, etc. I've done this technique before successfully, but it was long enough ago. I'm trying to think now. I know I've done this technique successfully, but I am questioning how much I measured all the other speakers. I may have just checked it against the center channel or something and called it a day because it was a while ago. I would want to be really careful at checking all those things. Like I said, I think the easier way to ensure everything integrates well would actually be to keep the bass management basically in the receiver, go out to the flex out the LFE output, the subwoofer output really, and do the tuning there and just compensate for the delay in the processor there. In that scenario, you would not apply any high or low pass filters in the flex. You would leave that alone. All you would be doing is playing around with the EQ and possibly shell filters. I say possibly because that's how you could get in a target curve that matches, but be very careful with those shell filters. You can end up boosting a subwoofer so much that you actually do damage. So I hope that's helpful. And it looks like there's another piece to this. Oh my goodness. The AVR subwoofer outputs in my case too, but they're actually just bridged, go into the Flex RCA inputs 1 and 2 respectively. Then it has 4 subwoofer outputs, and I'm running the cables each of my subwoofers LFE in. It depends on which MiniDSP flex you get. In my case, I stuck with the unbalanced RCAs, but it comes in balanced and other configurations as well. Yeah, sure. For what it's worth, if you've got 2 subwoofer outs that are wide together and you stick them to the flex in, that's unnecessary. I can't imagine it doing any harm, but you don't need to do that. All you need to do is have one of the RCA outs go to one of the RCA ins on the flex, and then what you do is you just route the one RCA in to all of the outputs. Now, it's not hard to do at all. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching. It seems to me that you guys really like these more DIY topics on tuning, and I have not really done a lot of those, even though I'm perfectly capable of tuning these things up well. So I'm wondering if we should start to think about more videos that I can do on the topic. I'm always get a little bit nervous going too deep with some of this stuff because I don't want to put something out where I don't give all the information just over time. Like I need to keep the video short, and then having somebody do damage to their system because they misunderstood. I was talking to Adam Pelz actually about the proliferation of the use of the MiniDSP, and part of why I think it's gotten so popular is actually the class that he teaches, the HAA class, because they use MiniDSPs and recommend them. So many people who went through that would then go on the forums and say, hey, you got to use this, it's great. Because realistically, we were talking about one of the problems that kind of exists on the market. He was asking me what processors besides the Trinnov and the Storm offer significant flexibility in tuning. And so you've got the Trinnov, you've got the Storm, you have Emotiva, you have, let's see, the Monoprice one, you've got the old Datasat one. I think that there's Theta, which is Datasat basically, because it's all ATI, and probably any derivatives of the ATI product would have this kind of flexibility. I'd actually be curious because I don't know all that well. So I know that outside of using the Odyssey software, nothing from Marantz or Denon is going to have any kind of flexibility like this. But using that Odyssey PC software, you do get PEQ, and shell filters and all sorts of stuff. So you get a lot of flexibility. Onkyo and Marantz and Yamaha have very, very basic capabilities. I'm not going to count what they have for EQ because it's just not flexible enough to be considered similar. Let's see. So we've got audio control. They do not have this capability. So are you guys aware of any processors or receivers outside of the ones I've already mentioned that have PEQ, like fully flexible PEQ, where you can set the Q, the frequency, and the amplitude to anything, including fractions of a value, where you can do shell filters, where you can do arbitrary high and low pass filters that don't match? I mean, that's a big one too. Sometimes you actually have very good reason why you would not want to have a Linkwitz-Riley fourth order low pass, so 24 dB per octave low pass, with a Linkwitz-Riley 24 dB per octave fourth order high pass. They're symmetric in that way, but actually acoustically would not be with a lot of systems. And a lot of systems don't let you change those filters, and that limits the ability to get everything all matched up perfectly. So in the comments, feel free to mention some others that I've maybe missed, because I'd be curious, but hopefully there's more coming. In fact, I think there might be some more coming very soon. And hopefully at lower price points, because as much as I love those processors that I mentioned that can do this, they often are just too expensive for some of the lower end projects. And I say lower end, they're still high end projects and they're still excellent. They just don't have the budget for processors at that cost. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. I hope you appreciate all the information. I look forward to the comments on this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. The subscriptions are actually surprisingly important, and so are the comments. And then all the donations you all have been giving, which help to justify, as I said, the time that I put into answering these questions and covering the cost of editing, is greatly appreciated. My wife is actually doing the editing now. We had somebody doing it and we ran into some problems, and I'd like to get back to having a professional doing it again, because it's just a lot of work for my wife, but we got to make sure there's enough funds to justify that. So thanks again. Keep on watching. I got more coming.